In this episode of the IT Experts podcast, we help you work out how to deal with toxic employees. Welcome to the IT Experts podcast, the only podcast to help MSPs scale to 1 million, and if already there, get to 5 and go faster. At the end of the day, isn't it all about building a business that works for you rather than you for it? I hope you enjoy the show. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome wherever you are. Today we have Julie Hutchison back in the podcast lounge, who is one of our leadership coaches at the MSP Growth Hub. And today we're going to be talking about how to deal with toxic employees, which is a nice, bitey, exciting subject, isn't it, Julie?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Old and hairy, I call them normally, like...
Get one of those, get a nice prickly subject. Well, welcome back again today. And again, we've got a topic that's really important that we're going to run through a couple of key areas to help you to overcome some toxic employees. Everybody in everybody's business doesn't always get along. They're not always connected. They're not got the same agenda. They've got different lives in personal, different lives in business lives. But every now and then we come across people who we just feel are just like, I think that's it, isn't it? We just feel, I just don't want this person in my, I don't know how to deal with them. I can't get rid of them. What do I need to kind of do with them about? Give us a bit of context, Julie, on what you're seeing in the leadership space around this really difficult, thorny, hairy subject.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I've been a workplace mediator and a mediation trainer for far too many years, I care to mention, to be quite honest. And so I've seen an awful lot. And what I see is a massive avoidance of issues until they get to that, what I call the big old hairy, horrible, difficult thing to deal with. And then we see, Bob's a toxic employee, or it's all Bob's fault. And we end up like demonizing these people who potentially could have been all right at the start, or maybe we never liked him in the first place. But it's almost like this big thing that we end up either avoiding until it's really, really difficult, and then it becomes horrific, or we just kind of like adjust around people and put up with stuff that actually really impacts over time on the productivity, therefore your profitability, but in everybody's lives as well, everybody there, not just the leaders. But what we see is that leaders don't know how to deal with it. They don't want to deal with it because it's in the too difficult box. And so they're kind of like, and then it just gets so difficult and so stressful that it becomes the hardest, or one of the hardest parts of their day-to-day job.
So what is, in a typical MSP, what is a toxic employee? How do they show up? What do they look like? How do we identify them?
Well, anybody, in my opinion, can be a toxic employee, in that I think it's a very harsh term. It's a term that we all love to use. However, for me, in my experience, I think actually it's kind of an excuse term to blame other people for the employee, as in we've labelled them as toxic. That's all they can be, So when we say toxic employee, what you're going to be seeing is somebody who is getting on your nerves, or who is being awkward in your eyes, or who isn't doing what you want them to do with a smile on their face, let's say, and is making your life harder and everybody else's life harder. So they might be like sucking the energy out of the room. They might be sucking your energy. They might be taking up a lot of your time. And there might be somebody that you wish you'd never employed because you don't know how to deal with that problem. And so the benefit doesn't outweigh the effort that you've got to put in. And you're thinking, crikey, I'm paying this person and it's harder for me to have them here than not. And over time, obviously at first when we get somebody, we think, we've got to put the effort in, we've got to do all these things. So the return on our investment in anybody takes time. But I think it's where we're looking at this, like the investment that I'm putting in, or that the team are putting in, isn't giving me that benefit back again. And I think that's when we start thinking, it's a toxic employee and not worth having them there. And so we feel like, toxic, want to get rid. And I think that that's kind of how we would describe what's going on. Although probably in my opinion, and I'll explain later, that I don't necessarily think that that's a fair label for many people.
So what sort of behaviours would they be? You've talked a lot about, how you as a leader are going to feel about them, but what would this employee kind of look like? What sort of behaviours would they show up? Because it's also around, they probably don't display the company values either, do they?
No, so you're probably, it's like the old computer says no type thing, you know, and if you've just seen that, you might not have seen it, but the Inside Out 2, the film, at the moment, there's a character in there called Ennui, you know, the old French boredom.
Right.
It's like, no.
Yeah.
There's a lot of no going on. I think what you're going to be seeing with a toxic employee, it depends on the reason and what's going on, but you're going to be seeing that it's an effort to get them to do something. So they're not going to be giving their discretionary effort. You're literally having to sort of feed them everything to get them to do something. You might be having to, kind of say, like, can you do this? Oh, they literally just do something, like only that, and they're not thinking. That's kind of a low level. But then they might be not doing what you've asked, or they say, yeah, I'm going to do that, and then they don't do it. And moving on from that, you might see somebody who is pushing other people's buttons, making life harder for people, not trying to build relationships, but actively, pulling those relationships apart. Or It might be the office gossip, or it might be somebody who's, just complaining and coming in, and sort of giving everybody all the sort of sucking the energy and negativity out of the room. I was at the gym the other day, and a woman come in, and all she did was like, oh, this is terrible. Oh, this is horrible. Oh. And everybody who was happy before was like, oh, like I was thinking, what's going on? And I think it's those people that kind of like suck that team and energy and enjoyment out of the room. For some reason are, oozing this either negativity or kind of like slowness and pulling, like you feel like you're wading through treacle, and you just don't feel like it's like in flow, let's say. You're probably out of flow, and it just feels like, like, well, why aren't they just doing what I want them to do? Why are they being
why is this so hard work?
Why is it such hard work? And there's many reasons for it, but that's kind of the things that you're going to be seeing, and as a leader, what you'll be thinking is well, they're just doing that. If you're going to call them toxic, you're probably thinking it's their fault. It's something they're doing.
Yeah. So, Julie, tell us, how do we deal with toxic employees in our MSPs?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we need to do is to really ask ourselves the question, what's actually happening here? What's going on, and why is that going on? Because it's really easy to just blame others or look at it and go, oh, they're broken. I can't fix that. Yeah. As leaders and business owners, just to, dare I say it, put our big boy and girl pants on and actually have the difficult conversation that isn't necessarily going to be easy, and is going to be super uncomfortable probably, because who likes that apart from me? But like, but nobody really wants to have that. But the problem is, if we don't, then it's not going to change, because there's a kind of like a way of working now, an MO in the office, of what's happening. So I think the first thing we have to do is to say, I'm going to come with the attitude of like, I need to understand underneath here and find out a little bit more. And that means we have to have the conversation with that person. So the first thing I would say is that you need to sit down somewhere private, obviously. And the first thing I think is to name it, to call out what is happening here, and with empathy, and say, what I'm seeing is, and actually saying, for example, Bob, when what I'm seeing in the office is that quite often, you're talking about people or whatever they're doing, or you're quite negative about things. And the problem is the impact that we're having on that's having is this making the team really sad, or making the team really awkward, and then everybody feels uncomfortable, and we're not getting work done because we're focusing on this bad stuff. Mm-hmm. So we're labeling what we're seeing, doing it with empathy, without that blame of like, you're just a miserable so-and-so or whatever. Don't do it that way. Do it with this sort of, just name the thing. And then with empathy say, well, I'd really like to know what's happening, because we have to understand this reason why before we start then saying, well, this is what we're going to do. Yeah, because we can't jump to those conclusions. So asking that question, like, what's going on, Bob? What's happening for you? Yeah. And I think we already talked about in another episode actually about human needs. And so really what we're looking at here is going back and saying, well, what's not being met for Bob, let's say, what is happening? Because all of this behaviour, any behaviour, good or bad, is a response to a stimulus. So what's going on? What is happening in Bob's life? It might be, I don't know, his wife left him, or, something's gone wrong, or he's heard something. You don't know what's happening. So we need to be able to stop and listen for long enough. And you might need to build a bit of rapport there and a bit of trust and everything else. And this might take a little bit of time, but you need to understand what need is not being met for Bob. And I can hear you all screaming at me saying, well, what about me?
What about me? Me.
But yes, we will do that bit. But first of all, just give it some time, because actually we might be able to resolve this by understanding, this is why he's doing what he's doing, let's say. And then once they say, well, if there's nothing, then right, okay, well, if you're not willing to admit what's happened, this is the change that we want to see, because this is the impact that this is having on the team or on us or whatever it might be. So we need to help them to see the impact of that behaviour and understand, why they're doing it. And then, regardless of what it is, if it is, well, wife's left me and I'm feeling really sour about things, then we need to also help them to understand that's not okay to take that out on people in the office. So because we all know that, sometimes, you come home from work, you've had a bad day, you slam the door and everybody at home sort of feels like, and it's the same the other way around. What's happening potentially is that something's triggering them and they're just bringing it to the office with them, for example, or it might be within the office. And so we need them to understand that as a grown-up, we need to maybe stop and breathe before we respond to whatever trigger is happening to them, and to help them to understand, this is why we need that to stop, and to help them to make that choice of, actually, I'm going to think about that. I'm going to change my behaviour. And when we start to do that, if we can understand what's going on for them and empathise with them, they can feel like, well, you understand them. You aren't necessarily saying that's an excuse, but you can understand what's going on for them. And if you do that, because somebody feels a bit more heard, a bit more, then they lower their stress response, they lower that trigger, and they're like, okay, that's probably wasn't the best response, or no, I can see that I'm not being very helpful in the office. And you're building relationships, you're building understanding, and therefore that person can respond in a much better way. Because if you think about it, somebody coming and having a negative response to something that's going on for them it's probably a completely unaware type response, unconscious, and so we're bringing that conscious to them, but we have to do it with the empathy. Otherwise, all you get is a pushback, and then you get a fight. And
this is classic shadow of the leader self-awareness, isn't it? Understanding what's going on around you, what's going on to you, and kind of like what's happening with the other party as well.
Yeah, and the other thing is you might find out that actually there's something else deeper going on in the office. Like, I don't know, Bob's heard Felicity saying something really horrible, and now he's like, really not feeling loved in the office, and therefore that's where the toxic behaviour is actually coming from. So we can do something about it once we know about it and we're big enough to kind of hear what's really going on. Now, obviously, all of this, it does mean that person will have to stop being, toxic, but they might turn around and say, well, actually, it's you, or I don't like the way you spoke to me on Monday or whatever, or you're bullying, or whatever the thing is. And so we have to take responsibility for what we're going to hear as well, because if we really want change, there's probably some change for more than one person.
We need to do ourselves.
And we need to look at ourselves. And as you said, that's around the shadow of the leader.
So we have talked about this in a previous podcast, but what's the framework that you would suggest to starting to have this difficult conversation with this employee?
Yeah, so I always go on about the bin model, and I think it's the best way to do it. You can use that, and if you want to use a coaching framework as well, we use a grow model, and we've talked about that. I'm sure if we haven't, we
just run us through that quickly, Julie. What the bin
grow
model, what the grow model is.
Yeah. So the grow model is a coaching model. Basically, grow because it's GROW, which is what's the goal of what we're trying to do here? What's the reality of where we are at the moment, and what options do we have to take ourselves forward, and then what are we going to commit to? So if you imagine in this situation, if you were going to try and coach this person, first of all, what I would do, because you're the one who's bringing it, they won't have a goal of sorting this out necessarily. So it might be your goal, not their goal.
It's our fault at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I would start with a little bit of reality. So GROW is a methodology of going through a conversation. Okay. We start with what do you want to achieve and where are you now? Well, I would turn that around a little bit and start with where are you now and where are we now, let's say. And then I would use the bin model, which is behaviour, impact, need. In other words, Ian, what we're seeing at the moment is, you being, shouting in the office and shouting at your staff, and the impact of that is that they're not happy about that. They don't really want to work with you anymore. And, Stuart's had enough of you, or whatever it might be.
He's not allowed to.
And then need. So that was behaviour, that's impact. And then need is, look, we need to sort this out. We need you to, build those relationships with your employees. So behaviour impact needs a little model that will allow you to not do the, hey, Ian, I think you're an idiot type blame language. So we're not blaming, we're understanding. We're telling you a fact, this is the behaviour, this is the impact, and this is what we need. And then you can move into that coaching conversation of like, you know, what's going on for you, a little bit more about, that's where we're talking about that, what's going on, understanding that reality a bit more. So digging into there first, and then saying, okay, so, you know, where do you want to be, Ian? Would you rather be here? Because I know where I'd rather be. I'd rather that we had, you know, a positive relationship, and we want to see people harmony in work, or whatever you want to say. That's the goal here. But this is what we are seeing. What can we do about that? So the reality part of that growth model in this kind of situation would be much, much bigger, because here you're saying, why is this happening? You know, what's going on? What's underneath all those things that we just talked about? What's underneath all of that? So you're going to spend some time really dig, but you're going to lead we want this goal to be harmony, and you to be happy as well, Ian, or whoever it might be. Do you know what I mean? So it's about really helping them to see that that's where they want to get them to agree to that, and then say, okay, so what are our options? And then we can say, we're coaching them because we're asking them to take responsibility for it, as well as us, because you don't know what's come out yet. You know, it might be, actually, do you know what? Yeah, I need to change the way I'm dealing with this. So I suppose the options could, in this sense, you're kind of coaching two people at the same time, yourself and them. Yeah, what options can we have here? And they say, well, you know, actually, maybe I could take a deep breath before I come into work, or maybe I could think about my behaviour before I do it, or, you know, or don't get so stressed if, you know, and I don't know, whatever the thing might do that they actually suggest. And it might be, no, we all actually have to sit down and we have to talk about this as a group. So it could be anything that might come out of that. And then using that growth model, you know, with, well, what do you commit to is, you know, well, what are we going to do is tying you and them down to some actions. Because if you think about in that conversation, if you can pull it into that kind of coaching conversation, at the end, what you want is both you and them to have a plan to walk away with, so that you can make sure that you change what you're doing, what they're doing, or whatever needs to be changed, you know.
And it's a win-win for both, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's not just about a one-way conversation, is it?
And that's the really, really important part. It's a win-win for both of you two, if you two are in the conversation. If there's other people involved, it needs to be a win-win for them. So whatever we're looking at is not just compromise, which is one of the things that we think we have to do, which is not the perfect answer. But the best answer is collaboration. It's like, how can we make this work together? How can we start to have a look at what each other's needs are? And you might say, you know, well, I need everybody to be getting on in the office. You need to feel respected, Bob, or whatever the thing might be. Let's look at how we can actually make that happen and come up with a plan. And if you can do that, what you're doing is you're respecting that person, but you're also asking them to show up as an adult, and you're showing up as an adult, not parent-child or two children arguing, you know, which is quite easy to do, even though we're all adults. It's easy to fall into that trap of, you know, showing up in that way. And so once you've done that, you've just had a really good conversation that's focused on change, focused on action, but it's also focused on respect and listening to what's really going on for that person.
So when you finished having that conversation, you kind of got a bit of an agreement, you understand where each of you is coming from. How often would you recommend that someone then sits down and then just kind of checks in on your agreement, checks in on the plan? Would that be a weekly thing? Would you leave it a month? Would it depend on the severity of the issues, or what would you recommend there? This is follow-up, isn't it? It's classic follow-up.
It's follow-up as agreed in that plan. So if you think about it, if I say to Bob, like, right, Bob, you know, over the next few weeks, I really want you to try and think about your behaviour and think about how the impact you're having on people. Why don't you just watch people a little bit, Bob, and see what impact you know, you're having on them? And he goes, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. I'll tell you what, you know, let's give us 2 weeks and let's come back and have a conversation about that. Yeah, don't leave that a year and then say, Bob, you've not changed, because you're not helping them to be motivated and to have those follow-ups. So I think being reasonable about what you're doing. And I tell you what I do hear a lot of the time, Ian, is that, especially in MSPs, and I don't know why, it's probably everywhere, but I think we've been doing a lot of work with MSPs lately. It's almost like I feel like it needs to be so formal. I've got to sit you down with my pen and my list.
Get married.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. That's a coffee. Or, you know, it's obviously in a nice private space if you can. Yes. But like, it's a human check in. It's a, and it, depending on what you're asking them to do, because this might be accompanied by a, like, this really needs to be sorted out, otherwise we're going to end up on some kind of plan or other, or there's a negative outcome that might happen. Yeah. So depending on how that is, but it might be, look, let's check in, see how you're doing. Let's check in because we want to see an improvement. So if we see an improvement in a couple of weeks, and let's keep talking about it. If we see that, that's great. If we don't see that, then we're going to have to look at other more formal methods. But really, what you need is a human conversation. Because you need to give them the opportunity to change, but you need to build that rapport in order to do that. You need to help them to trust that, because remember, you're asking them to do something really quite tricky, because they're stuck in a way of being and in a response. You're asking them to stop and get out of that. So they need a bit of that support, a little bit of like understanding, but a little bit of encouragement and some, outcome of if they don't do it. And all of that needs you to, just be human with them and say, like, how you doing? How's it going? Let's have a sit down. Why don't you pop in my office a second and let's just have a quick cup of coffee and let me hear what's going on for you, what's working, coming back into that coaching conversation. How's it going? What's going on? What's your next plan? What are you trying to achieve? Right, okay, great. And getting them to keep thinking about what they need to be doing and how they need to be responding. Because you could turn this round, and instead of losing a technically great person who's annoying you, you could help them to see that you care, which means they will be much more loyal. They will want to work with you. And so suddenly their technical expertise becomes even more valuable because they are engaged with you. They're engaged with the team. And so it's 100 times more impactful into your business. And then you don't have to either pay them off or pay a recruitment agency to find somebody new because you've had to get rid of them. And so what you're doing is changing the ROI of this employee with a little bit of different investment in time and empathy and understanding. And, you've got to call it out. You've got to say, this is what I need to see different. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying just love them, but I'm asking you to think, why is this person doing it? Because we're all human and we're doing something because of a reason.
And that's the kind of like the wrap up, the conclusion, isn't it? That, if you don't do this, the impact of not doing this is that this toxicity or this negativity will spread, like you just mentioned about that lady in the gym. Everyone was all motivated. She came in huffing and puffing and, oh my God, this is a chore and wrong mindset. And there was something I was reading the other day, which was a book. It was a book by Napoleon Hill, actually, I think.
Think and Grow Rich?
No, it was actually Success Habits. It was his first one. I can't believe it. It was like written in the early 1900s. It's bonkers. But it's all the classic, personal development stuff. And it basically said you can only sit in the positive or the negative side of your brain. You can only do one or the other. And you only have one or the other, you only have one or the other. You only have two sides of your brain. So you can either be thinking positively or you can be thinking negatively. And generally, if you've got someone who's in that toxic place, they're going to be living in their negative brain. Yeah. The lady who walked into the gym was living in a negative brain. So decide where you want to hang out. If you want to hang out in the positive world, and this is why they talk about you become the average of the 5 people you hang around with. If you're hanging around with positive people, guess what? If you're hanging around people who are moaning and groaning and you're moaning and groaning, also, guess what? So
it's a vicious circle. Yeah.
It is.
And think about could talk football if we're not careful, couldn't we? But if there is not the right energy and we've got negativity, it's actually really hard for the other people to do something different. Yeah. Because we don't want to put ourselves out there.
No, not at all.
Kick a ball up front if there's no one there to catch it. If you don't want to catch it, kick it, or whatever you do in football. But do you know what I mean? So we're not going to put ourselves out because we've not got the support. We're going to look like the outlier now. We're going to look like an idiot because we've tried something that everybody else says, what are you doing that for? Or whatever, and then you're going to be the one who's weird and wonderful in the team. And nobody wants to be that. Apart from me normally, but it means that you're kind of stopping other people from being more positive. So there's that kind of natural tendency to everybody being more negative. So it does take a bit of momentum to push, it's like trying to start a roundabout, you've got to push and push and push. And then eventually the flywheel comes in the other direction of a much more positive team.
Exactly. Brilliant stuff. That was absolutely brilliant, Julie. I love it when we throw in bin model, grow model, and all of those kind of things. What's your summary on today's call? What's the actions that the MSPs maybe have a couple of employees either in their business or want to spread this over into dealing with some difficult children or something in their home life? Yeah. What's the top tips to take away?
I think, just thinking about, first of all, your mindset of like, if you're saying Bob's a problem or you have a toxic employee, stop yourself for a second and think what's going on underneath. That's the first thing. Take responsibility for thinking there might be more to this and I need to find it. I'm a detective here. Okay, that's the first thing. Secondly, big boy or girl pants on and ask the question, name it, speak to the person, label it with the bin model, behaviour, impact, need, use coaching to try to get them to work towards where we need to go. So take that responsibility, don't hide it, ask them the questions, but do it with empathy and come out of that with actions for yourself and for them, and then check in and make sure that they're working through that and they're taking responsibility. And if the worst comes to worst, remember, you can go down that good old HR route, but you're better off not doing it because the investment here will be worth it in the end if you can turn this round. Okay. And if you're struggling, don't forget, ask for help, because it isn't always the easiest thing. And there are people out there that can help you with this, even if it's just it's because it's a stressful thing, even if it's just, bend somebody's ear about it, whether it be a coach or just the MSP Growth Hub, whoever it might be, just ask that
help, reach out
and get some help.
Brilliant stuff. Julie, thanks ever so much again for your time putting this show together. Absolute cracking one. I know everybody's resonated with everybody, either in the past, and if it isn't for you right now, it might be something that might pop up in the future, as in when you bump into people while you're building your incredible network. So until next time, thanks again. Look after yourselves and have a great day. See you all soon.
Bye.
Hang on a minute, just before you go. And if you're curious about how this episode links with the ability to scale your MSP to 1 million, or if you're already there, accelerate to 5, then we want to invite you to come and take the MSP Mastery Quiz. And in just 3 minutes, you're going to get a 360-degree scan of your business where you can identify the 1 or 2 tactics that can help you find more time, engage and align your people, and help generate more leads in your MSP. It's really simple. Just click on the link in the show notes. And if you have enjoyed this episode, we'd love to get some feedback from you by means of a rating, review on Spotify or iTunes or your podcast platform of choice. We really appreciate every single one of them. Now you can go and enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to catching up and connecting with you soon. All the best now.